Welcome back to another story on Whispered Tales. Now, let's dive into today's story. The Mother in the Shadows. Part 1. The Insult at the Wedding. I was never much for hotels that smell like fig lotion and ambition, but that's what greeted me when the elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor, a perfume pumped into the vents and the buzz of a five-star staff moving like a Broadway chorus line. I'm 62 and a widow. Two plain facts, not a plea, and there are still days when Manhattan looks like a city that swallowed my youth and spit back something chrome and cold. But I had come willingly to all that glass and chandeliers because this was my daughter's wedding day, and for mothers, there's no map out of that sort of moment. You show up. You fix the loose thread. You keep tissues in your sleeve like your own mother taught you. You smile until your cheeks cramp and you swallow whatever stones the day gives you. My shoes were the sensible kind, navy leather, low heel. I'd bought them at a store in Brooklyn where the saleswoman called me "Hon" and meant it. The dress was a slate blue number I'd taken in myself 2 nights ago, hunched over the sewing machine by the kitchen window while the BQE hummed like a faraway ocean. I had chosen slate blue because black felt too much like a funeral and blush felt like asking my bones to lie about their age. When I stepped into the hotel's ballroom foyer, everything sparkled to a point that made my eyes water, giant arrangements of white orchids climbing out of gold urns, candles set in glass cylinders as tall as toddlers, a string quartet whose bows rose and fell in a choreography of money. Mrs. Carter. A woman in a headset appeared, smiling with only the top half of her face, the lower half was busy with efficiency. We're lining up family for pre-ceremony photos. She flitted her gaze over me, a quick scan the way a TSA officer might check an ID that doesn't quite match the photo. If you don't mind waiting just off to the side, we'll bring you in right after the bride's party. Of course, I said. I learned a long time ago that a mother's, of course, is a bridge over other people's plans. I set my gift bag on a small table near a vase of peonies and adjusted the ribbon. The bag was heavier than it looked, not because of the tissue paper or the card I'd rewritten 3 times, but because of what lay beneath: documents tucked into a plain white folder, papers with embossed seals, a letter on my attorney's letterhead, and a key fob in a velvet sleeve that beeped you past a doorman who'd learn your name in 2 days flat. I rested my hand on the bag like it was a cat that might leap. Gifts are peculiar things. The ones that matter most often ask you to part with some private version of yourself. I had helped in the modest, motherly ways I could in the months leading up to this, paid deposits, ran errands, told Sophia that yes, the dove-gray napkins did look better than the ivory. It's your day, I'd said, meaning it, not as some bitter prelude to a tally sheet. But a day like this runs on money the way a play runs on light cues. The flowers from the Brooklyn wholesaler I've used every school fundraiser since 1993. The tasting menu I split with the caterer, because I know what it is to say, "We'll see what we can do," and secretly mean, "I'll make it happen even if it means robbing sleep." The photographer, Lord, the photographer, whose rates could have covered a decent used Prius. When the invoice came, I'd pressed my palm to my chest and laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it felt like standing in the Atlantic in February and pretending it was a summer lake. You shock yourself into belief. The Caldwell family arrived in a cloud of perfect tailoring and confident laughter that didn't need any room's permission. Ethan's mother wore a wickedly beautiful champagne sheath. You could tell from across the room it was the kind of dress that never lived on a clearance rack. His father shook hands like he was sealing something important. They were gracious in the way practiced people are gracious, every compliment landing precisely where it ought to. A social media team, yes, a team, hired by someone for content, darted around with gimbals and softbox lights, catching candids that required 3 takes. Then there was my daughter. Sophia. 34, stubbornly independent since birth, a woman who can look at a room and know where the eye should go first. She was luminous in the way you want a daughter to be on a day like this, even if you're not the kind of person who says, luminous. Her dress fell clean from shoulder to hip, no fairy tale poof, because Sophia doesn't do poof. She saw me, and something softened in her face. "Mom," she breathed, and for a second we were back in the little kitchen with the crooked cabinet door I never could fix, frosting a cake at midnight with a butter knife. "Sweetheart," I said, and kissed her cheek, careful not to leave lipstick. "You look like everything turned out right." "Almost," she said with a half-laugh, eyes on the swarm of planners. "We're behind. Ethan wants to, well, he just wants the pictures to be immaculate." "Of course," I said again, not yet knowing the shape of that word today. Ethan crossed the foyer toward us like a man who knew every camera in the room was a mirror he had to charm. He is handsome in the way you'd expect of a startup founder with a podcast, strong jaw, eyes that flick to the correct person, a haircut that tells you nothing about his barber and everything about his budget. He kissed Sophia, then turned to me. "Eleanor," he said, and for a split second I believed there was warmth in it. "Congratulations, Ethan." "Thank you." His smile was a bright, photogenic thing. "We're just wrangling a few details. You know how these things are. Logistics." He glanced over my shoulder, then leaned in a fraction, lowering his voice. "Quick thing, just for a second. I have taught second graders how to tie their shoes and war veterans how to read their first paragraphs aloud. I know a quick thing is rarely quick, and just for a second is a bet made with borrowed time." Still, I nodded. "What's up?" He pointed, casual, toward a space near the service corridor, where waiters were wheeling in racks of champagne flutes. "Would you mind waiting over there when they start the family photos? We're doing this editorial-style spread for our socials and the site, my PR guy's coordinating, and we've got this whole palette going. It's, you know." He flapped a hand, searching for a word that should have had the decency to run from him. "Curated. We'll bring you in for some intimate shots later, more documentary, less staged. It'll look more authentic that way." It took me a second to understand, the way it takes you a second to recognize your own handwriting in a note you don't remember leaving. Editorial style. Palette. Curated. The words hung like shiny ornaments on a false tree. "You're asking me to wait in the hall," I said, keeping my voice even. "Oh no, no," he said, smile not slipping so much as bracing itself. "Not the hall. Just, off the main set. The photographers are shooting for wides, then hero shots, very architectural, clean lines. And you," he paused. "Your dress is beautiful, by the way." The compliment came like a napkin folded after the glass has already spilled. "We just want the composition to read the way we planned. Everyone in the bridal party is wearing very specific tones. It's going to be everywhere, YouTube, Insta, press pickups, so we're being super intentional." I looked at the place he meant. A shadowed strip beside the service door where a laminated fire exit plan was taped eye level. Intentional. I thought of the intentional ways I'd nudged this day forward, checks written without fanfare, errands run, apologies made for delays that weren't mine. It's a particular skill of a teacher, of a mother, you make the machinery invisible so the show looks effortless. I felt a prickle climb my neck. "Sophia," I said, turning to my daughter, "is this what you want?" Her eyes flicked from me to Ethan to the cameras and back again, the way her eyes used to do when she was 10 and stuck between telling me the truth and telling herself a better one. "It's just for the wide shots, Mom," she said, little laugh attached, like she could glue us all together with it. "We'll do ours later. I promise. It's the media plan." The phrase sounded alien in her mouth, like a coin she didn't realize she'd been carrying. "Of course," I said again, because what else does a mother say when the room has already decided? You don't raise a child to be her own person and then yank the reins the minute she gallops in a direction you don't like. You stand where you're told and you wait for your turn to be wanted. So I moved toward the spot near the service door. A waiter brushed past me with a tray of foie gras on toast points that looked like confetti squares. The overhead light here was more honest than the ballrooms. It showed the wear on things, scuff marks on the wall, a stain shaped like Florida on the carpet, a small tear in the edge of the exit map where someone's ring had caught. I tightened my shawl around my shoulders even though I wasn't cold. Across the room, the photographer was arranging bodies like chess pieces. Can we get the Caldwells in tighter? Perfect. Sophia, chin up. Gorgeous. Ethan, hand in pocket, relaxed, but heroic. I watched my daughter, the way she tilted her chin because someone told her to, the way she glowed in a dress that fit her like good advice. I thought of the first day I brought her home from the hospital, how the city out the cab window seemed impossibly bright. The driver had a rosary dangling from the rearview mirror and he drove as if he was escorting a saint. At a red light on Atlantic Avenue, a man with a cupcake balanced on a paper plate peered into the back seat and said, "God bless," and I'd cried because that's what hormones do when a stranger's kindness touches a part of you you didn't know was exposed. Eleanor. Ethan's voice again, closer, careful. I knew you'd understand. You've got such a classic sense of appropriateness. He seemed proud of the word, as if he'd pulled it from a place most people don't know to look. I taught first grade for 38 years, I said, not bothering to add that appropriateness is sometimes a costume children are forced to wear because adults can't handle their truth. I understand a great many things. He nodded as if we were discussing weather. We'll grab you in a second. Promise. Then he turned away because a camera had. People talk about the way a room tilts when something humiliating happens to you. That's not how it felt. The room stayed perfectly level. It was me who tilted, a seam inside me that gave with a small, nearly polite pop. I thought of the folder in the gift bag, the folder whose weight had kept me steady on the subway this morning, whose contents I'd checked 3 times last night with the care you bring to a passport. I'd planned a surprise for after the toasts, after the cake, after the little speeches where people say the same truths in different suits. I had imagined the look on their faces, Ethan, grateful, maybe even humbled, Sophia, stunned and tearful in the way she gets when something good catches her off guard. Surprise is a currency, too. We spend it on the people we love, trusting they'll convert it into something gentle. A burst of laughter rose from the cluster of groomsmen near the bar, the kind of laughter men save for each other. The kind that means nothing good for the person not in on the joke. I wasn't eavesdropping, the sound came to me like a weather report you can't shut off. Ethan's voice, distinct in its polished certainty, floated on top. I mean, have you seen her place? It's quaint. A pause, then a different register, lower, confiding. Sophia's a saint, man. Honestly. Her mom's a financial anchor. All heart, 0 cents. Sweet, sure. But if we're building the life we're building, I can't. He made a soft clucking sound with his tongue, the sort of punctuation you use when you're discussing a faulty appliance. The room didn't tilt then either. Something else happened. A ledger I didn't know I carried, some antique book with my mother's handwriting in the margins, flipped to a fresh page. I didn't gasp or storm over. That's not my theater. I have lived long enough to know that dignity is sometimes the refusal to become additional entertainment. I simply picked up my gift bag, slipped the loop of ribbon over my wrist and stepped back into the hall where the elevator waited like a square of mercy cut into a wall. Mrs. Carter. The headset woman jogged after me, one hand to her earpiece as if a higher authority was whispering. We're about to bring you in. Another time, I said, and I must have said it with enough authority to make even her earpiece hush, because she stopped and let me pass like I wore a crown no one could see. The elevator doors slid shut with the soft sigh of an old friend. In the mirrored panel, I saw a woman I recognized but hadn't spoken to in a while, a face lined with years of late-night fevers and parent-teacher conferences, with stubborn gratitude and cheap coffee and the kind of love that doesn't always look photogenic. I didn't look like anyone's palette. I looked like myself. Which, on some days, is harder to carry than a set of orchids. The lobby was a cathedral of glass and polished stone, a place where the city outside behaved like another guest, flashing its lights in every reflective surface. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and the noise of Manhattan hit me square, horns, the hiss of a bus kneeling to the curb, a couple arguing softly in Spanish, the shuffle of a man selling knockoff colognes from a suitcase. Digital billboards flickered above like secular constellations, faces I didn't know, products I would never buy, promises big enough to fold the city in half. "Taxi, ma'am?" a doorman asked, and the ma'am was friendly, not pitying. He was a big man with kind eyes, the kind of employee who notices when your hands are shaking and pretends he doesn't. "Not yet," I said, and walked to the corner where a food cart was sending a ribbon of steam into the spring air. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, a bowl of oatmeal stirred with exactly 6 raisins because that's how I've done it since before Sophia had teeth. My stomach made a sound like a small animal complaining. The gift bag bumped against my hip. I tucked it closer. The folder inside seemed to hum, as if the paper understood it had just been spared a public life. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to see the raised ink again to know it was real. The decision came not like a thunderclap, not even like a sentence. It came like air finding its way into a room that had been sealed too long. There are thresholds most people don't notice until their heel has already crossed: the decision not to apologize for someone else's poor manners, the choice to leave a party you paid for when you realize you paid for the wrong thing, the quiet refusal to shrink yourself to fit the story another man is telling about you. A group of young women in satin dresses and block heels clattered by, laughing, phones out, their faces tipped toward a future I hoped would be kind. One of them glanced at me, took in the slate blue dress and the gift bag in the funny way I must have been standing, anchored. "You look pretty," she said, shy the way New Yorkers get shy when they surprise themselves with kindness. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Compliments are small, but they can mend a seam. I walked west, away from the hotel and its flute glass tower of a reception. The city is a sharp place, but it will hold you if you let it, the way a good chair holds you without comment. I passed a bodega with a cat asleep on a stack of paper towels, a gallery window full of paintings that looked like arguments, a man on a milk crate playing "Moon River" on a saxophone with such sincerity it made me laugh. I thought of the kitchen in Brooklyn and the sewing machine's soft winging noise, of my husband's laugh when he was still more presence than story, of the way Sophia used to bring me broken things and stand back, confident I'd know how to fix them. At the corner, I stopped at a crosswalk and pressed the button even though New Yorkers don't. Old habits. The little red hand blinked at me. I felt my phone buzz in my purse, 3 messages, 2 from unknown numbers with Caldwell Energy, I didn't open them, and 1 from Sophia. A photo cameoed on the notification, her, radiant, Ethan at her side, the caption already capsuled in their brand of perfection: "Forever starts now." The algorithm would serve it to a million strangers and they would tap hearts and write comments like, "Obsessed," and "Goals," and maybe, "You deserve this." I hoped, briefly, that among them would be a woman who knew how heavy forever can feel at the beginning. The light changed. I crossed, the gift bag a pendulum at my side. People say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've been a teacher too long to believe in cold things as solutions. What I felt was not revenge yet. It was the slow, measured warmth of a boundary returning to a body. Warmth can be a kind of justice, if you direct it rightly. I didn't know all the steps yet, only that I would not stand in anyone's shadow again, literal or otherwise, and that the next time anyone asked me to be intentional, the intention would be mine. A man in a suit bumped my shoulder and apologized without looking at me. I nodded because city choreography is built on nods. A bus sighed to a stop and exhaled a phalanx of teenagers arguing about pizza. A little boy in a Spider-Man t-shirt pointed up and said, "Look, Mommy," and she did, without asking why. The sky over Manhattan was the particular shade of blue cashmere gets after too many dry cleanings, still soft, slightly thinned, holding. By the time I reached the next avenue, my phone buzzed again. A voice message from Sophia, her breath fast, the background a clatter of wedding china. "Mom. Where did you go?" Ethan said, "Well, never mind what he said. Just, can you come back for the family pictures? Please. I want you in them." A beat, then softer, I love you. I stopped under the awning of a building whose doorman looked like he'd been standing there since Nixon. I listened to the message twice, then a third time. I could have turned around. I could have marched back, found my place near the laminated exit map, and folded myself small as a place card. But the ledger page was open now, and my hand knew what to write. I pressed the phone to my chest for a second the way some people press a cross. Then I put it back in my purse and kept walking, not away from my daughter, but toward the mother I meant to be in the second half of my life. When I reached the corner, I hailed a cab, old-fashioned, arm out like a flag. One pulled over, yellow, worn, honest. I slid in and gave the driver an address that surprised even me. Not home. Not yet. There's a moment, if you're lucky, when the city offers you a mirror not of your face but of your will. I had just been handed mine by a man with a perfect haircut and an imperfect heart. Big night, the driver said, eyeing the dress in the mirror. Big enough, I said. He merged into traffic, the car settling into the river of it. I rested the gift bag on my lap and smoothed the ribbon. In the window, my reflection rode beside me, a woman who had been told where to stand and had decided to move. Somewhere behind us, a quartet played songs selected for their shareability. Somewhere ahead, something else waited, something without a hashtag, without a palette, without a script. I didn't know its name yet. I only knew it would be mine. When the cab pulled onto Fifth Avenue, the city was lit like a carnival that had forgotten how to shut itself off. Neon, LED screens, shop windows crammed with mannequins in spring collections that cost more than my annual mortgage had back in Brooklyn. I held the gift bag on my lap the way you hold a child on its first bus ride, careful, protective, a little foolish. The driver hummed along to an old Billy Joel song on the radio, and for a moment I wanted to laugh at the cruel symmetry. Here I was, a woman who had once clipped coupons with surgical precision, riding through Midtown with nearly $10 million in a paper bag tied up with a ribbon. The thing about humiliation is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps. First there is the sting, sharp as gin down the wrong pipe. Then the throb, like a bruise blooming. Then, worst of all, the echo, words replayed in your skull on a loop until you start to wonder if you misheard them. Financial anchor. Off to the side. Curated. The echoes filled the back seat until I had to crack the window just to breathe air not already poisoned by Ethan's voice. Cold April wind rushed in, carrying with it the smell of roasted peanuts from a cart and the sour tang of garbage bags waiting on the curb. Manhattan never lets you forget what it costs to shine. I thought of my husband, Daniel. He had been gone 17 years, heart attack in the middle of a March afternoon, while I was proctoring standardized tests in a classroom that smelled like pencil shavings and nerves. He'd been 50, still making jokes about how he'd live forever because his grandfather had, and still buying lottery tickets every Friday night with a wink that suggested destiny owed him a favor. He never won more than $20, but he loved the ritual, the choosing of numbers, the scratch of the pen as he circled birthdays, the small ceremony of hope. After he died, I sometimes bought tickets out of habit, but never with the same faith. It felt like ordering his favorite beer after the funeral, something that only reminded you of the absence. And yet, there I was, a month ago in a corner store on Flatbush, standing in line behind a man buying cigarettes and a woman with 2 crying toddlers. My rent bill was in my purse, my arthritis pills waiting at the pharmacy, and I had exactly 2 crumpled singles left over from groceries. A display by the register blinked with its gaudy promise, Mega Millions, jackpot $75 million. On some impulse I still can't name, I slid the bills across the counter and asked for a ticket. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was Daniel whispering from whatever place he landed. I tucked the slip into my coat pocket and forgot about it until the numbers rolled across the television 3 nights later and matched the ink in my hand. Winning didn't feel like lightning striking. It felt like a weight lifting, a weight I hadn't realized I carried every waking second of my life. After taxes and the state's cut, there was $46 million sitting in accounts with my name on them. Enough to silence every overdue notice, every panicked glance at the heating bill, every hard swallow when Sophia's voice on the phone hinted that she and Ethan needed just a little help with planning the wedding of the century. I hadn't told a soul, not even Sophia. The lawyer I hired was discreet, the kind of man whose gray suits looked ironed into his bones. He helped me buy the penthouse, quietly, in cash, tucked under an LLC with a name as bland as wallpaper. He explained investment portfolios the way you'd explain algebra to a tired child, patient but firm. For weeks, I carried this secret like a live coal in my chest, hot, consuming, impossible to set down. My plan had been simple, maybe naive. On their wedding night, after the champagne and the dancing and the endless photographs, I would hand Sophia the folder. A home in the sky and $5 million to seed their new life. Not because Ethan deserved it, but because Sophia was my daughter, and mothers give, even when it hurts. The cab stopped at a red light near Bryant Park, and I caught my reflection in the window. For years, I'd thought of myself as faded wallpaper, useful, invisible, holding together the seams of other people's rooms. Tonight, though, I looked different. The humiliation had burned something raw but alive in me. Behind the lined face, the slate blue dress, there was a woman who had almost given her dignity to a man who hadn't earned the courtesy of her name. "Where to, lady?" the driver asked, glancing in the mirror. I hesitated. Home in Brooklyn would have been easy, my two-bedroom walk-up, the radiator that hissed like a judgmental ant, the pile of graded papers still sitting on the dining table. But something in me resisted the return. Going back to Brooklyn tonight would mean carrying the shame into familiar walls, letting it soak into the curtains like smoke. I wanted distance, air, the illusion of choice. "Drive uptown," I said finally. "Central Park West." He nodded, and the cab surged forward. The city stretched out like a restless animal, taxis darting, delivery trucks groaning, skyscrapers glinting like teeth. I pressed my hand to the gift bag. For the first time, I felt not guilt for keeping it close, but a stirring of possession, as if the money inside was mine again, not something to be handed over like tribute to a false king. I thought of Sophia's voice on the voicemail, strained, torn between loyalty to her new husband and love for her old mother. My heart ached for her, but I also felt a clarity sharper than grief. Children grow, they choose, they stumble. What they do with our sacrifices is their business. What we do with ourselves is ours. The cab passed the Plaza Hotel, glowing like a wedding cake in the night, and I remembered my own wedding day in 1981. Simple church basement, sheet cake from a neighborhood bakery, Daniel in a suit that cost less than a single boutonniere at Sophia's reception. We hadn't cared about curated palettes or editorial shots. All we'd cared about was that the radiator clanked loud enough to drown out the vows, and that the wine was cheap but plentiful. And yet, that day had carried us through decades, through mortgages and miscarriages and PTA meetings and cancer scares, until death cut the thread. Love doesn't need hashtags. Love needs endurance. By the time the cab rolled past Columbus Circle, I had stopped shaking. The humiliation was still there, yes, but braided now with something stronger, resolve. Ethan had wanted me invisible. He had wanted me off-frame, off-balance, a footnote in his glossy narrative. But he had underestimated what a woman my age knows, how to endure, how to store silence like a weapon, how to wait until the right moment to strike. I leaned forward. "Driver, change of plan. Take me to Madison Avenue. Near 72nd. He whistled softly. "That's the fancy part." "I'm feeling fancy," I said, surprising myself with the edge in my voice. He chuckled and turned east. Outside the window, the city thinned into wealth, brownstones with polished brass, boutiques shuttered for the night but glowing like jewels in the dark. We stopped in front of a sleek glass tower that climbed into the clouds. I paid the fare, tipped too much out of habit, and stepped onto the sidewalk. The doorman in navy livery gave me the kind of once-over I used to dread, but tonight it barely grazed me. I slipped past him with the confidence of someone who owned a piece of sky. Inside, The lobby smelled of lilies and quiet money. A chandelier the size of my old living room sparkled above marble floors. I pressed the elevator button, the gift bag still looped on my wrist, and rode up to the 39th floor. The doors opened into silence so profound it felt like another world. My penthouse, mine, waited behind a door of brushed steel. I unlocked it, stepped inside, and closed the door on the city's roar. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a painting. The Empire State Building blinked in the distance, its lights pulsing. I set the gift bag on the marble counter and stood in the middle of the room, my reflection fractured in the glass. For weeks I had imagined presenting this space to Sophia as a beginning. Now I realized it might be my own beginning instead. I walked slowly through the rooms, 3 bedrooms, a library, a kitchen gleaming with chrome. Each step steadied me. This wasn't just a property. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't some anchor to be hidden away. Proof that fortune, cruel as it is, had finally smiled on me. Proof that I could build a life not as someone's mother, someone's widow, someone's burden, but as Eleanor Carter, woman, survivor, winner. I poured myself a glass of water from a crystal pitcher and stood by the window, looking down at the grid of streets where taxis streamed like fireflies. In another part of the city, my daughter was dancing, smiling for cameras, clinking glasses with people who believed wealth and style could substitute for decency. Here, alone, I felt something far richer, the first breath of freedom in years. Humiliation had brought me here. But it would not define me. Not anymore. I didn't turn on the lights right away. The penthouse had a way of glowing on its own, borrowing the shimmer of the skyline through its glass walls. The city was a jeweled animal stretched at my feet, bridges glittering like veins, the Hudson slick with silver reflections, Times Square flashing in gaudy pulses. I leaned against the cool windowpane, water glass sweating in my hand, and let the silence roll over me. After the chaos of the wedding, the stillness felt like a cathedral. The gift bag sat on the counter where I'd left it, ribbon drooping to one side like a wilted flower. That bag had once been a promise. Tonight it was a monument to my almost folly. I walked toward it, pulled out the folder, and spread the papers across the marble island, the deed to the penthouse, the transfer documents for the investment account, the velvet sleeve with the sleek key fob. I touched each one, almost reverently, then gathered them into a neat stack. There was something ceremonial about the act, as though I were reclaiming them from the shadow of Ethan Caldwell's ambition. I sat at the counter and poured myself a small whiskey from the bar cart I'd barely stocked. The burn steadied me. For most of my life, I'd been careful with alcohol. Daniel had liked a beer after mowing the lawn, but I'd always been the practical one, measuring groceries against the budget, water against thirst. Tonight, though, the whiskey tasted like an ally. Humiliation, I realized, is a close cousin to grief. Both strip you down, both steal the air from your lungs. But grief had taught me that loss can also clarify, sharpening what matters until it gleams. As the whiskey warmed me, clarity began to take shape. Ethan's words, financial anchor, had cut deeper than perhaps he knew. They weren't just cruel. They were dismissive, erasing decades of my labor, my sacrifices, my survival. To him I was dead weight, ballast, something to be hidden in the service corridor of his curated life. I thought of Sophia. My daughter, radiant in her gown, torn between loyalty to the man she'd chosen and love for the mother who had raised her. I didn't hate her. God, no. But I pitied her blindness. Love at 34 is a fever that burns away perspective. She couldn't yet see Ethan for what he was, a man who worshipped image over substance, ambition over loyalty. I couldn't protect her from that fever. But perhaps, I swirled the whiskey in my glass, I could inoculate her against its consequences. The idea came like the first flicker of a match in the dark, fragile, tentative, but undeniably there. Retaliation. Not petty vengeance, shouting in a ballroom or flinging accusations, but something slower, sharper, more deliberate. A chess game rather than a fistfight. Ethan lived by appearances, then let his ruin come by exposure. He valued control, then let him be undone by forces he couldn't manipulate. I carried my drink into the living room, sank into a leather armchair facing the skyline, and let the thought grow. I'd been underestimated my whole life. By students who thought a 60-year-old teacher couldn't understand TikTok. By administrators who shuffled me aside for younger, shinier hires. By men at PTA meetings who nodded politely but dismissed my opinions as motherly instincts. And now by my own son-in-law, who thought I could be curated out of a photograph. But what none of them knew, what Ethan certainly didn't know, was that invisibility is a training ground. When people don't see you, you see everything. I remembered the laughter of the groomsmen at the wedding, Ethan's voice rising above theirs, and I felt the coal of anger glow hotter. He thought he was safe behind charm and money, behind social media filters and carefully orchestrated branding. But I had glimpsed the man beneath, calculating, cruel, dismissive. And I knew instinctively that men like that always left trails. Financial, emotional, digital. If I could find those trails, I could unravel him. The thought thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. I wasn't a woman trained for battle. I'd spent decades teaching multiplication tables and coaxing children to read aloud without fear. But perhaps those years had been training of another kind. Patience. Observation. The ability to see through excuses and half-truths. If I could manage 31st graders hopped up on Halloween candy, I could certainly manage one arrogant tech executive. The whiskey glass emptied, I set it down and rose. I walked the length of the penthouse, bedrooms hushed, kitchen gleaming, library smelling faintly of new leather. Every corner whispered possibility. This space was meant for more than hiding. It was a command post. On the desk in the library sat the new laptop my lawyer had insisted I purchase, for correspondence, for managing accounts, for security. I opened it, the glow of the screen bathing the room in pale light. My hands trembled slightly as I typed Ethan Caldwell into the search bar. Pages of results bloomed, interviews in glossy magazines, keynote speeches at tech conferences, Instagram posts with captions full of buzzwords and emojis. He was everywhere, his smile curated to perfection, his narrative tightly controlled. But even in that sea of polish, I sensed cracks. A delayed product launch here, whispers of lawsuits there, gossip columns hinting at late nights with colleagues. Threads, waiting to be tugged. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair, heart pounding. Tonight was not the night to dig deeper, not yet. Tonight was the night to decide. Was I truly ready to step into this role, to let go of the quiet, compliant Eleanor Carter who had always chosen dignity over conflict? I looked around the penthouse, at the skyline sprawling like a battlefield beyond the glass, and felt something settle inside me. Yes. The clock on the wall chimed midnight. Somewhere downtown, Sophia would be dancing her last dance, cutting her cake, tossing her bouquet. Somewhere, Ethan would be shaking hands with investors, laughing with friends, already rehearsing the press release about his perfect wedding. Let them. Let them believe the story they had curated tonight. My story was only beginning, and it would end very differently. I rose, gathered the folder from the counter, and locked it in the desk drawer. The gesture felt symbolic, like sheathing a weapon until its time came. Then I walked to the bedroom, slipped off the slate blue dress, and hung it carefully in the closet. Tomorrow, the newspapers and Instagram feeds would be filled with images of a perfect celebration. None would show the mother standing in the shadows near the service door. But I carried that moment with me, etched into my bones, a scar that would not fade. As I slid into the cool sheets, I whispered into the darkness, not a prayer but a promise. You should never have underestimated me, Ethan Caldwell. And for the first time in years, I slept not with the weight of worry, but with the electric hum of purpose. Part 2. Discovery of Fortune. If anyone had told me I'd become a millionaire in the fluorescent aisles of a Brooklyn bodega, I'd have laughed and asked them to hand me a bottle of aspirin instead. But life has a cruel sense of humor, and sometimes its punchlines arrive printed on cheap pink paper with 6 numbers scrawled across the top. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March, cold enough that the wind cut through my coat as I walked home from the pharmacy. My arthritis medication had gone up in price again, and I'd stood at the counter doing the math, pills or groceries. The clerk, a young man with earbuds dangling, didn't look up when I slid my debit card through and prayed it wouldn't decline. It didn't, but barely. My bag was light as I left, just the pills, a loaf of bread, and a head of lettuce that had seen better days. I stopped at the corner store because the heat in my apartment was stubborn, and sometimes a hot cup of coffee from the grimy pot behind the register could trick my body into believing it was warm. The place smelled like fried food and cheap detergent. Behind the counter, taped to the glass, was the lottery display. The jackpot number was obscene, 75 million. I'd seen it every day on my way to school for years, and most days I barely registered it. But something about that Tuesday, maybe the weight of the pill bottle in my bag, maybe Daniel's old voice in my ear reminding me of the ritual, I pulled 2 crumpled singles from my wallet and asked for a Mega Millions ticket. "Quick pick," the clerk asked, eyes still glued to his phone. "Yes," I said, though I didn't care. Numbers are numbers. Fate doesn't consult preference. I stuffed the slip into my coat pocket and forgot it, the way you forget a grocery list once the cart is full. That night I ate toast and tea for dinner, graded 2 stacks of spelling quizzes, and fell asleep with the TV muttering to itself in the background. When the winning numbers rolled across the screen, I was half dreaming. I only stirred because one of the announcers was shouting like a revival preacher. Something in me stirred. I reached into my pocket, unfolded the ticket, and compared it against the glowing screen. Once, twice, 3 times. The numbers matched. All of them. I sat very still, my hands trembling so badly I had to set the ticket on the coffee table and back away from it as though it might explode. I thought of Daniel, his ritual every Friday, his grin as he circled dates that meant something only to us. I thought of how many times I had rolled my eyes at his optimism, how many times I'd said, "Don't count on it." And now here it was, the miracle he'd chased, dropped into my lap like a dare. The next morning, I took a cab to the state lottery office. The ride felt unreal, as if I were being ferried to a courthouse for a crime I hadn't committed. The clerk behind the bulletproof glass checked my ticket, stamped it, and told me, with no ceremony, that I was the sole winner. After taxes, after deductions, after all the slicing and skimming the government does, 46 million would be mine. 46 million. I tried to picture it, rooms filled with cash, vaults, armored trucks. But the reality was cleaner, quieter. It would be numbers on a screen, accounts in my name. Still, I walked out of that office like a fugitive carrying a secret too heavy for my bones. The first person I wanted to call was Sophia. My daughter had been struggling with rent, juggling wedding deposits, begging Ethan to cover what she couldn't. I wanted to hear her voice, tell her it was all going to be okay. But even as I pulled out my phone, something stopped me. I pictured Ethan's sharp smile, the way he talked about branding opportunities, how he once joked that he'd rather hire a financial advisor than trust a parent's advice. If I told Sophia, it wouldn't stay between us. Ethan would know, and suddenly my windfall would become theirs to manage. So I kept my silence. Instead, I found a lawyer, a man recommended by the lottery office. His name was Richard Hanley, gray hair cropped close, eyes that scanned documents like X-rays. He wore charcoal suits and spoke in sentences that always seemed to have semicolons in them. Sitting across from him in his midtown office, I felt like a schoolgirl being quizzed on material I hadn't studied. "You'll want to claim through a trust," he explained, sliding papers toward me. "An LLC, perhaps too. Anonymity is your friend. Congratulations, Mrs. Carter. But also, condolences. Your life as you knew it is over." I almost laughed. Life as I knew it had been over since Daniel's death. What Hanley didn't understand was that anonymity wasn't a curse to me. It was familiar ground. I had been invisible most of my life, standing behind students, behind committees, behind Sophia. I could manage invisibility again if it meant safety. With his help, I set up accounts. I opened one under a bland trust name that could have belonged to a janitorial service. Into that, the state wired the winnings. I visited a penthouse listing he suggested, discreet cellar, no mortgage trail. The place was impossibly sleek, all glass and marble, perched above the city like a lighthouse. I signed papers, and just like that, I owned $4 million worth of sky. At night, I sat at my kitchen table in Brooklyn, the same scarred table where Daniel once balanced checkbooks, and logged into accounts that blinked with numbers I couldn't comprehend. My fingers shook as I typed passwords, as if at any moment the system would reject me, spit me out, declare me unworthy. But the numbers remained. Millions. Tens of millions. Mine. I kept teaching my last semester before retirement, kept shopping at the same corner store, kept clipping coupons I no longer needed. Outwardly, nothing changed. Inwardly, everything had. I started walking with my head higher. I noticed the way clerks treated women in old coats versus women in new ones. I realized that security guards looked through me not because I was harmless but because I had mastered the art of seeming so. And then came the wedding planning. Sophia's voice on the phone, anxious, weary, asking if I could cover the florist, the caterer, the photographer. I said yes each time, sending checks, wiring deposits. I told myself it was a rehearsal, a way to flex the muscles of giving before the grand reveal. I dreamed of her face when I handed her the folder, shock, gratitude, maybe tears. A home to start her marriage, an investment account to secure her future. The gift of freedom, wrapped in paper and ribbon. But as the wedding day drew closer, a gnawing doubt grew inside me. Ethan's requests grew sharper, his tone colder. He spoke of brand alignment and social capital, words that felt like boardroom jargon rather than family conversation. I noticed the way he dismissed me when I offered suggestions, the way his eyes slid past me to Sophia as if I were irrelevant. And still, I told myself, this was her choice. Love demands sacrifice. What I didn't know then, what the wedding night would make brutally clear, was that sacrifice only matters if the recipient values it. Otherwise, it's just self-erasure. Looking back now, I think fate had handed me that ticket not just to rescue me, but to test me. To see whether I would keep giving until nothing was left, or whether I would finally learn the lesson humiliation had been trying to teach me for years. Dignity is not a gift you hand over. It's a fortress you defend. That lottery ticket had been a door. For a month, I stood in the threshold, one foot still in poverty, the other in opulence, not knowing which way to step. The wedding shoved me across. And now, standing in the penthouse I'd nearly given away, I realized, the fortune wasn't just money. It was leverage. It was armor. It was the key to rewriting the story Ethan thought he was offering. The first night I slept in the penthouse, I woke 3 times in disbelief. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, crisp and cool against my skin, nothing like the faded flannel I had used in Brooklyn for years. At dawn, sunlight spilled across the skyline, piercing through glass walls that made the city feel like it was mine alone. For a long time, I sat on the edge of the bed in my nightgown, staring out at Manhattan as if it were a painting hung just for me. It is a peculiar thing to go from scarcity to abundance overnight. Poverty trains you in small rituals, saving the last piece of bread for breakfast, washing aluminum foil to use again, timing laundry so you don't waste quarters. Wealth, I discovered, has its own rituals, subtler but no less consuming. My lawyer had arranged for an investment manager, a man who spoke in percentages and forecasts, who sent me emails with attachments full of graphs I barely understood. I nodded, signed, and reminded myself that even if I didn't speak the language of capital, I was fluent in survival. That fluency had gotten me this far. Still, I stumbled in other ways. The first time I went shopping near Madison Avenue, I walked into a boutique and froze. The saleswoman looked me up and down, the old coat, the practical shoes, and asked if she could help me in a tone that suggested she doubted it. I nearly fled. But then I remembered the card in my wallet with a credit limit higher than my old salary. I straightened my shoulders, asked for a black cashmere coat, and bought it without glancing at the price tag. When I walked out, the saleswoman's smile was different, warmer, respectful. Money, I realized, doesn't just buy things. It buys a recalibration of how people see you. Yet I was careful not to flaunt it. Back in Brooklyn, I still kept my old routines, riding the subway, grading papers, shopping at the same corner store. The penthouse became my secret sanctuary, a place where I could breathe, where the city's roar softened into background music. I told no one about it. Not Sophia, not colleagues, not neighbors. It was mine, unshared, untouched. But secrets have a way of slipping into your posture. Sophia noticed first. "Mom, you seem different," she said one afternoon as we walked through the florist's shop, choosing centerpieces for the wedding. Her hands were full of roses, but her eyes studied me. Lighter, somehow. Did something good happen? I hesitated. The truth sat on the tip of my tongue, begging to be freed. I wanted to tell her about the ticket, about the penthouse, about the plans I had for her future. But Ethan was there too, scrolling on his phone, muttering about color schemes. I caught the sharpness in his eyes when he glanced at me, always calculating, always assessing. My secret would not be safe if he knew. "Nothing in particular," I said, smiling. "Maybe I've just been sleeping better." It wasn't entirely a lie. For the first time in years, I wasn't lying awake wondering how to stretch a paycheck, how to cover Sophia's bills, how to repair the leaking sink without calling a plumber. Sleep came easier when money wasn't a constant storm cloud overhead. Ethan, however, was not convinced. Over the next weeks, I noticed his gaze linger longer, as though trying to decode me. Once, at a family dinner, he asked casually, "So, Eleanor, any exciting changes lately? You've got this glow. New skincare routine?" His smile was polite, but the undertone was there. He was fishing. I laughed it off. "Just oatmeal and good genes," I said. But my stomach tightened. Men like Ethan didn't ask idle questions. They hunted for leverage. The wedding loomed closer, and my double life grew heavier. In Brooklyn, I still clipped coupons, still walked to the laundromat with a bag of quarters jingling in my pocket. In Manhattan, I attended meetings with Richard Hanley and his colleagues, who advised me on trusts, charities, tax shelters. They spoke of me as a high-net-worth individual, a phrase that felt as absurd as calling a schoolteacher a captain of industry. And yet, there I was, nodding, pretending to belong. One evening, after a long day at school, I unlocked the penthouse and collapsed onto the sofa. The city glowed beneath me, alive and merciless. I poured a glass of wine and thought of the folder waiting in my desk, the penthouse deed, the investment transfer, the carefully typed letter I had rewritten 3 times to make the gift sound less like charity and more like love. I imagined handing it to Sophia, watching her eyes widen, watching Ethan's practiced smile falter. For weeks, that fantasy sustained me. But the more I imagined Ethan's face, the more unease stirred. He was not the type to accept gifts with humility. He would see the penthouse as a trophy, the account as fuel for his ambitions. Sophia might benefit, yes, but at the cost of entangling my fortune in his schemes. Could I trust him to honor what I had built? The question haunted me. The answer came not as words but as a growing instinct, no. It was a Saturday in late March when suspicion sharpened into certainty. I had invited Sophia for coffee at my Brooklyn apartment. She arrived flustered, explaining that Ethan couldn't join because of a meeting. But her phone buzzed repeatedly during our conversation, and when she finally glanced at the screen, I saw his name. Her face tightened, and she excused herself to the bathroom. I shouldn't have looked. But years as a teacher had trained me to notice details. The screen lit up again with Ethan's text, "Did you ask her?" My blood chilled. Ask me what? I smiled when Sophia returned, but my heart was pounding. Later that evening, when I slipped into the penthouse, I stood by the window for hours, the city blurring below me. He suspected. He was pressing her. And if Sophia asked directly, I wasn't sure I could lie to her face. That night, I wrote in my journal, a habit I'd kept since Daniel's death. I wrote of the lottery ticket, the lawyer, the penthouse, the secret that now sat like a stone between me and my daughter. And I wrote of Ethan, his hunger, his calculation, the way he had begun circling me like a hawk. Writing it down clarified what I already knew. If I revealed the truth too soon, it would not belong to me anymore. It would belong to him. So I waited. I watched. I honed the art of silence. But silence did not mean passivity. Slowly, I began to test the edges of my new life. I learned the mechanics of investment from Hanley's firm, asking questions until the jargon became less alien. I met with an architect about renovating the penthouse, not because I needed it but because I wanted to feel the power of choice. I even visited a charity for women who had been financially abused, quietly donating under an alias. Their stories of manipulation, of men controlling every dollar, reminded me too much of Ethan's grip on Sophia. Each visit fueled my resolve. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a strange blur, half the time spent in Brooklyn classrooms, teaching spelling rules and multiplication, the other half spent in Manhattan, learning to be someone new. I became a woman split in two, walking different streets but carrying the same secret heartbeat. And all the while, Ethan watched. At dinners, his eyes flicked over my outfits, my jewelry, though I wore nothing extravagant. At family gatherings, he asked questions that seemed casual but weren't. Do you ever think about moving, Eleanor? Brooklyn's a bit dated, don't you think? Or, planning any trips soon? Maybe Europe? Each time I smiled, deflected, played the harmless widow. But inside, my patience thinned. The night before the wedding, I stood in the penthouse library, folder in hand, rehearsing the moment. I pictured Sophia's face, pictured the future I still wanted to give her. But then I remembered Ethan's laughter with his friends, the way he once told her she overestimated my opinion on the guest list. I remembered the text on her phone, did you ask her? And I knew, deep down, that the folder could not go to them. Not yet. Not as things stood. I slipped it back into the desk drawer and locked it away. Tomorrow would bring clarity, one way or another. After the wedding night, the secret I had been nursing became more fragile than ever. Leaving that ballroom, humiliation clinging to me like smoke, I had not only walked away from my daughter's celebration, I had walked into a new chapter where my fortune was no longer a gift waiting to be bestowed but a shield I had to raise. The days immediately following the wedding were eerily quiet. Sophia called twice, her voice tired, her words carefully chosen. Mom, Ethan feels terrible about the mix-up, she said, as if my exile to the service corridor had been an accounting error rather than a deliberate humiliation. He wants to make it up to you. I told her not to worry, that I was fine, but she didn't believe me. Daughters always hear the tremors their mothers try to hide. But it wasn't Sophia I was worried about. It was Ethan. His silence stretched too long, his absence in the calls too conspicuous. A man like him never stayed quiet unless he was plotting. And sure enough, within a week, I caught the first whiff of his suspicion. It came through Sophia, of course. Over coffee at a small cafe near Union Square, she leaned across the table and asked, Mom, have you come into some money recently? Her tone was hesitant, almost apologetic, but her eyes searched mine with a pressure I hadn't felt since she was a teenager asking if I'd noticed the missing 20 from my purse. I set down my cup carefully. Why do you ask? She hesitated. It's just, you've seemed different. Lighter. And Ethan, she stopped herself, biting her lip. Ethan thinks maybe you've had some help. Or that you're hiding something. There it was. The suspicion had surfaced. I forced a smile. Sophia, if I had a secret fortune tucked away, do you think I'd still be riding the subway? She laughed weakly, but I saw the doubt flicker. Doubt planted by Ethan, watered daily with his insinuations. That night, back in the penthouse, I walked the perimeter of the glass walls like a sentry. The city stretched beneath me, oblivious, but I felt eyes on me. Maybe not literal yet, but metaphorical. Ethan's gaze, probing, prying, unwilling to accept that someone like me could possess something he hadn't accounted for. The next clue arrived 2 weeks later. Returning from the grocery store, I noticed a man loitering near the penthouse lobby. He pretended to be scrolling on his phone, but when I passed, he glanced up too quickly, his eyes sharp. I recognized the look instantly, watchfulness disguised as distraction. I had seen it in classrooms, in children who thought they were hiding notes under desks. He wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't a guest. He was someone's eyes. I told myself not to be paranoid, but the pit in my stomach said otherwise. The following evening, Richard Hanley called. His voice was unusually taut. "Mrs. Carter, I've received inquiries, unofficial ones, about your trust. Nothing compromising yet, but someone sniffing around. Be cautious." I thanked him, hung up, and sat in silence. Ethan. Who else? He had the money, the connections, the audacity. A private investigator, maybe. Or a financial contact leaning on someone for information. He wouldn't rest until he understood the change in me. But what he didn't know, what he could never understand, was that women like me don't fold under pressure. We adapt. We've been adapting our whole lives. So I began to adjust. I changed routines. Took different subway lines. Shopped at odd hours. I kept my Brooklyn apartment as a decoy, making sure lights were on, curtains moved, neighbors saw me coming and going. The penthouse became more than a refuge, it became a fortress. I invested in new locks, discreet surveillance cameras, even hired a cybersecurity consultant recommended by Hanley. The man was younger than some of my former students, full of jargon, but he showed me how to encrypt emails, how to recognize phishing attempts, how to scrub traces of my digital life. Ethan's suspicion, however, filtered constantly through Sophia. She called more often, sometimes with excuses so thin they made my heart ache. "Ethan was just wondering if you needed help with your taxes." Or, "Ethan thinks maybe we should consolidate family assets, it's more efficient." Each time, I deflected, reminded her that my life was simple, that I had nothing worth consolidating. But each lie scraped against me, widening the distance between us. At night, I sat in the library, journal open, writing not only what I feared but what I planned. I listed Ethan's weaknesses, his obsession with image, his hunger for control, his underestimation of me. I wrote about the charities I might fund, the women I could help, the ways I could turn my fortune into something that mattered. And with every word, my resolve hardened. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday. I was returning to the penthouse when the doorman handed me an envelope. "This came for you, Mrs. Carter. No return address." Inside was a photograph. Grainy, black and white, clearly taken from a distance. It showed me leaving the penthouse lobby, gift bag on my arm, expression weary. On the back, in neat block letters, was a single word, interesting. My hands shook, but only for a moment. Fear had its place, but so did fury. Ethan was crossing a line. He wanted proof. He wanted to corner me. Then let him. Because while he was busy hunting shadows, I was preparing to turn on the light. That night, I opened the drawer, pulled out the folder, and spread its contents again. But this time, I didn't see them as gifts for Sophia. I saw them as weapons. The penthouse deed, the account transfers, the investments, they weren't just assets. They were leverage. Tools. And wielded correctly, they could dismantle a man like Ethan piece by piece. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine retaliation not as a fantasy but as a strategy. I would bide my time. I would learn his patterns. I would find his cracks. And when the moment came, I would not merely protect myself, I would expose him. The rain battered the glass, lightning flashing over the skyline. I sat in the dim library, the photograph beside me, the city below me, and whispered into the storm. You wanted to know my secret, Ethan Caldwell? You'll know it soon enough. But not the way you expect. And with that, humiliation transformed into intention. I was no longer just a woman with a fortune. I was a woman with a mission.